Hello, is this thing on? Then yes, okay. Great.
Yeah.
Cool. Hi, everyone who I can't see. I'm Lydia DePillis. I'm a reporter at the New York Times. I cover the economy and the job market, and we are really lucky today to have an awesome panel full of practitioners and academics. And so David Autor, who has done amazing research on the labor market and job quality and the impact of globalization. We've got Seth Harris, who has served in both the Biden and Obama administrations in the White House and the Department of Labor, and Kristina Francis at Jobs for the Future, where she helps people get trained into the new jobs that are evolving. And so, you know, why are we having this panel now? This is a question that I asked Ben when he asked me to do this. I think it's a good time for a discussion like this because after months and years really of an incredibly high pressure labor market where for various reasons, not everybody could come back to work like they did to the levels that they were before the pandemic. Workers enjoyed a lot of leverage born not out of any structural change really, but simply a mismatch of demand and supply. And the Fed is doing its darndest to slow that down. And so every economist you talk to thinks there's some kind of downturn in the works. When it happens, how severe it's going to be is up in the air. But I think it's useful to talk about what that could look like for workers and you know what long-term trends are still at work, changing how they go about their lives and what kinds of rewards they get for their labor. So let me just start out with that. You know, what do you guys think is going to be durable about the strange and kind of wonderful labor market we have had over the past year or so? Are any of those gains in wages, which even though mostly haven't they kept up with inflation, have still been like greater than they've been in a generation? What is there anything about that we can hope will remain through this next period that we're entering? I'll just throw that out there for anybody.
I'm happy to jump in.
Great.
We've been in a labor market that has been kind of growing increasingly tight really since around 2014, right? So it started in the Obama administration, continued in the Trump administration. When the pandemic came, of course, there was an implosion. I don't think any of us, certainly not me, thought we would be back where we are right now with it tighter than before the pandemic. But I think this is actually going to be a long run phenomenon. Of course, we're going to have recessions. We very well could have one engineered by the Fed very soon. But we have a real scarcity of labor coming from the fact that we have small cohorts of entering adults, low birth rates, extremely low immigration, right, enforced by policy at an unhealthy level, and large numbers of baby boomers retiring from the labor force. So all of that is going to create need for fresh young workers to do a lot of the work that needs to be done. It's not all going to be done by robots, not all going to be done by AI. So I think that things will remain tight, and that will maintain some of the gains. Now, a lot of those gains have been eroded by inflation. We don't want to see more of that. Even though it's reduced inequality, it's sort of cold comfort to know that inequality is falling because rich are falling faster than you're falling, not because you're getting wealthier. But I think there's a lot more we can do to continue to foster competition in low-wage labor markets. And I think that's what we're seeing now. It's good to see.
Yeah.
I would add a thought to that. I agree with what David just said, but I would add this thought, and that is that tight labor markets have, I think, meaningfully adjusted the kinds of jobs that workers are willing to take. We have seen workers quitting largely low quality job or lower quality jobs at $4 million a month for more than a year now. and largely flowing to higher quality, higher wage jobs, including jobs that don't require as much interaction with the public. That's a consequence of pandemic fears in part. And that has been a really meaningful transformation in the way jobs are distributed in our economy. Some of the low wage, lesser jobs that demand fewer skills are really going wanting. And as a consequence of that, at the bottom, we are seeing wages rising at a really healthy rate, even healthier than we're seeing certainly for the upper quartiles. So that would be a really good development to see continue. Now, the question is, what happens if the economy slows down? And do we see those kinds of effects ameliorated in some meaningful way? But I'm inclined to agree with David. The really poor long-term immigration policies that we have in the United States, and our willingness to let older workers sort of get forced out of the labor market through a variety of policy and employer choices, is really causing a lot of tightness in labor markets on top of what's happening in the macroeconomy. So the question is, are we willing to change policy and in a way that increases labor supply in the United States, or are we not? And therefore, we're going to see both a shift to automation and a continued tightness in the labor market. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
We should talk more about immigration down the road. But yeah, Kristina, from an education and training standpoint.
One thing that David alluded to was just the multiple generations in the workforce right now. And I actually think that's a factor to consider in terms of how we're moving forward and the choices that people make. Seth mentioned job quality, which I think is critically important. This recovery, this moment, this reevaluation moment that I call it, we didn't see people just quitting or ditching their jobs. They were actually being ruthlessly honest about what they could do for themselves, what they wanted to do for their families, where they needed to live. People are making real decisions right now, and that's actually changing where they're deciding to live, where they're deciding to work. We're also seeing employers really focused on worker voice and responding to the needs of their employees. And so I actually think we're going to start to see more worker voice and agency and urgency as we look at trends that are coming down the pipe.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to ask about something that was a big part of the labor discussion sort of pre-pandemic, which is the minimum wage. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that this recent labor market has done more for wages at the low end than any minimum wage policy, over the decades that it's been in place. And so it kind of makes me wonder, do minimum wages really matter anymore? Is there a role for them in continuing to raise the floor? I mean, I'll remind everyone right now, the federal minimum and that of almost half the states, I think still is $7.25 an hour. So do minimum wages matter anymore? Maybe that's best for David as the economist on the panel.
Oh, sure. So first of all, it's true that almost no one is being hired even below $15 an hour right now, which is not the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25, but the target minimum wage of the Fight for 15 movement for many years. But again, we need to remember a lot of that wage increases, those are nominal wages, not real wage increases, right? Inflation is moving really fast. So the minimum wage would do more if it were at a meaningful level. And it does do a lot in the states where it does bind. And we have had periods in our history where it's been quite high and quite significant. So for example, the late 1970s. So, but certainly it feels almost, quixotic to fight for 15 when, through inflation, primarily we won that fight or something. But I do think the minimum wage establishes a useful floor. The federal government shouldn't be trying to, the states should set their own minimum wages to some degree, but the federal government should come in and set a floor below which we don't want states to go. And I think there's very little evidence that reduces employment. There's very strong evidence that it raises earnings. So, one can obviously be quite concerned about the adverse effects of that, but we now have generations of research on this. And at least the low levels we've seen in the United States, the minimum wage does a lot of good and very little harm that we can measure. So there's a good case for keeping it at a reasonable level and indexing it to the median wage in the economy. So we don't have to have another protracted political fight every, depending on what the administration is. The minimum wage has been languishing for, more than a decade. That's crazy. That's not the way you set a national policy that affects millions and millions of workers.
Right.
I would say wage matters. And just again, what Seth mentioned earlier, job quality matters more as well. We've got 32% of Americans earning less than $15 an hour without decent working conditions. And a lot of these employers or workers, are disproportionately women, half are Black or Latinx. And so it's not just wages alone, it's about the full job itself. Is it their predictable scheduling? Are there paid care for their families? Are there advancement pathways? We've got to really consider this, particularly since these wages are important for family structures.
Yeah, those are other things that have been attempted at through legislation, but also have been happening organically simply through labor market pressure and bargaining power. So, and those benefits, that is just job quality related things, sometimes are easier to take away than wage levels. So I think it's important to watch going forward, whether things like 20 paid weeks of family leave stick around. And so, so going back to immigration for a second, because Seth pointed this out, I think the evidence on this is basically that immigration helps expand the economy, helps businesses operate at a higher capacity. And there's lots of research on what it may do to wages for native-born workers, right? So we're in this depressed level of immigration through policy and other geopolitical reasons. At least legal immigration, there's been surges at the border, it's a total political mess. So how would you calibrate immigration going forward to work best for people here without undermining the wage gains that have happened, particularly for workers in those service industries, frontline industries that don't require a lot of education to get into?
Yeah, so the evidence about downward wage pressure is generally at the lower wage levels.
Mm-hmm.
You do see some negative effects. That's both a combination of legal immigration and undocumented workers coming to the United States at very, very low wage levels. And there are certain industries like, crab picking, agriculture, others, where there is an effect. But as a general matter throughout the economy, more immigration, particularly if you're bringing in family members, with humanitarianism being a central component of what you're trying to accomplish in immigration, and family members bring a lot of stability to an economic unit, the family unit in the United States. Also, if you're bringing in more educated workers, but even if you're bringing in workers who don't have formal education, as a general matter, immigrant workers are extremely productive. They tend to be significantly younger than the domestic workforce, so they give you long-term contributions through taxes and other investments. And they produce for the economy in a meaningful way. And so the approach that we have taken is so much more about ideology than it is about humanitarianism or about economics, that it's really become self-destructive for our country. So I'm not a supporter of sort of points systems where you have to sort of prove your way into the country. If we were to expand family-based immigration, if we were to expand skills-based immigration, if we were to detach immigration from employer control so that employers were not able to sort of lock people into particular jobs and workers were able to flow freely throughout the labor market, that would help to elevate wages as well. And also, if we were to do something that would ensure that undocumented workers in the United States have all the legal protections that they need and have a rapid path to citizenship, that would also reduce any kind of negative effects that you had at the lower wage scales. So let me just say, we've been talking about this really ever since I first entered government, and you were nice, Lydia, to only mention that I was in the Obama and Biden administrations, but I also served in the Clinton administration. I don't look that old, I know, but I am. We've been talking about this the entire time I have had any connection to government, more than 30 years now. And we haven't really come up with a package of solutions, not because we don't know what they are. We know what they are. We just don't have the political will to implement them.
I think that's an interesting point, that it's not about the number of people you bring across the border. It's about the structures that are in place to allow them to, work their way up and grow the pie rather than competing for similar jobs. Did anyone else want a piece of that? Yeah.
Please go ahead, Kristina.
I was going to mention, just when I think about innovation and the opportunity, immigrants are job creators. They come here, they create lots of jobs, really good jobs as well. And we look at even just our Fortune 500 companies, I think 44% were started by immigrants or their children. So I just want to plug that as we look at innovation and innovation economy, particularly as we're rapidly changing from a technology platform perspective, types of jobs are changing. We really need more people who are creating companies that are creating new jobs.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, immigration is fairly bimodal in the United States, right? There's a lot of very high skilled immigrants. There are people who are coming from poorer countries where they haven't had the same opportunity for education. And we've just been talking primarily about the less affluent immigrants, but of course, high skill immigration, often facilitated through universities and so on, is a huge feeder of talent and innovation in the United States. We want to rebuild the chip industry. We want to reshore manufacturing. We want to improve our engineering base. A lot of the folks who do that are people who are attracted by our universities. They come here, they see this as an entrepreneurial, open country, and they decide to stay and invest, and they are responsible for so many of the, innovations, our Nobel Prizes are, and so many great accomplishments. And we harm ourselves, not only by, kind of numerically restricting those immigrants, but by making the U.S. a less hospitable place, a place, they're talented people now. The world wants them wherever they want to go. Countries are welcoming them. And the notion that the U.S. is not, the magnet destination, that you're going to face hostility based on your nationality, based on your religion, that's horrifying, on all levels. But, even from the most selfish level, it is self-destructive.
Got it. Thank you. Great discussion on that. So David mentioned the sort of effort to rebuild a semiconductor industry in the US, which makes me think about sort of the evolving role of manufacturing in our economy. Like, there is now an effort underway to try to maintain really strategic industries. And there's a ton of money flowing into it through the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act. And what does that demand of our labor market institutions, and what opportunities does that offer for workers? I mean, like, the rap on modern manufacturing has been that it is highly automated, which is, a great thing for, the growth of the economy and corporate profits, but not necessarily something that helps lift a larger number of workers up, even if some workers get more productive and are rewarded for it. So what do you guys make of this attempt to bolster domestic manufacturing? What potential does that offer? And, can we train a workforce to enable it?
I'm happy to start with that and then pass it on. And I think this is a great example if you pair a growing industry, a growing opportunity with a training program. And so looking at pre-apprentice programs or apprenticeship programs, work-based learning programs that allow people to learn this new skill that's growing. I think there's 700,000 manufacturing jobs. Semiconductor fabrication is a portion of that. We've got battery factories that are opening up, electrical vehicle plants that are opening, other clean energy companies that are starting and opening. So pairing growth careers with apprenticeship programs or work-based programs or earn-to-learn programs, I think can start getting more populations, particularly those without a four-year degree, into these jobs, many of which will be high wage or high earning jobs in the future.
Yeah, well, so I agree with that, but I want to add a very important component to this. So manufacturing jobs in the United States have long been good, solid middle-class jobs that deliver not just good wages, but also delivered benefits and sort of were stabilizers in communities. They helped to build entire communities. We actually experienced the downside of that in the late 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, when, and David has done a phenomenal job, not only documented this, but explaining why it happened, when communities were hollowed out, when plants closed down, and thousands of jobs in each community and millions of jobs across the United States were lost. The reason that manufacturing jobs, one of the main reasons that manufacturing jobs are such good quality jobs is because for a long time, they are and were union jobs. And it was unions in the auto industry and the steel industry and the rubber industry and paper making and others that ensured that workers shared in the profits through good quality benefits, healthcare, retirement plans, and solid middle class wages. So one of the big questions, and I think, Lydia, you sort of implied this in your question, is whether or not these are going to be the kinds of manufacturing jobs we have seen in the past. And that question is called not just in the energy transition we're experiencing right now, but it is very much called in that space where workers who built internal combustion engines for a very long time and made a good, solid union wage because of the great work of the United Auto Workers Union are now going to potentially transition into battery making jobs that largely are non-union and are much lower paying and are less likely to be attended by benefits. Now, if the UAW succeeds in organizing in the electrical vehicle industry and the electric battery industry, then those will be good quality jobs. We'll see good wages and we'll see strong communities as a consequence of that. But if the strategy is to build plants in right-to-work states, build the plants non-union, staff the plants non-union, and to hold wages down as low as possible as the competitive strategy, then we are not going to see manufacturing jobs restore their place as sort of a bulwark of the middle class.
Yeah, let me sort of agree and disagree. Manufacturing jobs, I fully agree, tend to be better jobs. But that's even true in non-union states, right? A lot of the growth of manufacturing or the movement in manufacturing has been down south over the since 1980, and southern auto manufacturers, a lot of plants. And even though there's no question that those southern manufacturing jobs are not as high paid as the union jobs, but they're better paid than the alternative jobs around. And one reason they're better paid is because they require skills and expertise that makes people valuable over time. And so they're not immediately substitutable by the next person who says, well, I can push that mop, I can work that register, right? You're like, no, I've been doing this for years and I can do it better than you. And that matters. So people build skills. And the other thing that's nice about manufacturing is, because it's heavy capital and it's not dependent on when your customer shows up to buy a cup of coffee, you tend to keep the plant running 8 hours, 16 hours, 24 hours. So it provides regularly scheduled work, which as Kristina was speaking about earlier, is so important to the structure of life for adults. So I do think manufacturing, I'm supportive of labor organizing in many ways, but manufacturing has some intrinsic virtues. I don't think it's going to be numerically enormous. We should not think that it's going to be restored to the size it was, when it was 20 million workers in 1979. I just don't see that as likely. But those will be high value added jobs. They support a lot of other activities and they're strategically important. Those industries are strategically important, but we should focus on other ways to improve job quality outside of manufacturing, because numerically it's not nearly going to be as large as, the combination of healthcare and education and food service and many other things. So it's worth investing in. It really matters. It's not a complete solution.
Really great points. I hadn't even thought of all those nice upsides to manufacturing. So natural segue. There are all these other service jobs that do not have the legacy benefits that were created in many ways by unions and also by the virtues that David cited of manufacturing. One industry that I'm thinking about a lot is the various care professions, which not only are, good, important jobs for people to do, but they enable other people to do jobs, right? So, so nursing home employment fell off a cliff during the pandemic understandably, and has not recovered, but there's huge demand for home healthcare aides. And then also similarly, childcare has not recovered. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it is something that undeniably constricts labor supply, because if you can't find someone to take care of your kid, you can't go to work. So, and there was a plan to deal with this through the original Build Back Better legislation, which contained billions of dollars in subsidies, basically. And in the absence of that kind of just federal funding, what do you guys see as the way forward to basically fix these broken industries where care is too expensive for families and not remunerative enough to provide good, stable employment and attract more people to the field?
Well, immigration is actually an important part of this story. I don't know if you've been to an elder care facility or anything like that. I spent a lot of time one a couple of years ago. Most of the workers are immigrants, and immigrant men and immigrant women who are nurses and are aides and so on. They're doing extraordinarily difficult work. It requires skill and an enormous reserve of patience. And I don't know who would be caring for those folks if those people weren't doing those jobs, those folks. So I think, there's many such jobs. They do need to be done. They should be remunerated well, and people should have job security and so on. But you need to have the folks who are going to do them, who are willing, who view that as a good opportunity. So again, this, restrictions on immigration are going to interfere with some of those things that need that work that, we value so much, although pay so little for. And let me emphasize, you say, well, why do we pay those jobs pay so little? And part of the reason is, social norms, class, and so on. But part of it also is jobs tend to pay better if they use a specialized skill set. And a lot of service jobs, though not all service jobs, use a fairly generic skill set. So, working as a cashier or cleaner or table waiters, not that some people are better than others, there absolutely are, but in general, you're not going to get, 10 years out, you're not going to be hugely more productive than you were in the first year. Unlike if you are working in manufacturing, you're working in engineering, you're working in an administrative or office setting. So we want to improve the quality of those jobs, and we want to move people into jobs where they have more opportunity to learn, to become skilled, to grow, and to build stability and responsibility. So we face the quantity problem actually is a lack of workers. So we face not the lack of jobs. The quality problem we face is a lack of sufficient good jobs. So we want to move both of those needles simultaneously.
Yeah.
So I'll agree with that, and let me incorporate by reference everything I just said about unions in the manufacturing context. I would say about in the healthcare context, partly because the kinds of things that David is talking about are made possible by having unions in healthcare, and the Service Employees Union and others have been really important advocates for home health workers, for childcare workers, for elder care workers, for nursing home workers, and others. But I do want to add an additional point, and I think Kristina could add a lot of value on this point as well. And that is an important part of achieving what David just described is building reliable skills-based career ladders and career lattices in the industry. So workers are willing to take lesser skilled, lesser paid jobs if they have hope that they're going to be able to acquire, either through work-based learning or through training or both, some kind of skill that will allow them to go to an identifiable place that is a better workplace, a better job, a higher paying job, particularly if it allows them to stack credentials over time and continue up a career ladder so that they're able to build a middle-class life for themselves. One of the problems in a lot of these industries, this is especially true in home healthcare, but it's also true in nursing homes and others, is that there is no obvious career ladder up and out of those kinds of jobs. Workers in those jobs often feel, and usually are stuck in those kinds of jobs at fairly low wages for an extended period of time because they don't have any organized system of training themselves or finding the skills and knowledge that they need in order to move into institutional settings and other kinds of settings where they're going to be able to earn more. That is not the kind of thing that individual workers are going to be able to accomplish on their own. It really is going to take government and government working with private sector partners to try to create those kinds of career ladders. And there are labor management partnerships that are very successful at it. Kristina mentioned apprenticeship as an extremely potentially important model in this space. I agree with her about that. But yeah, workers will suffer through the first year or two if there's hope in year 3 and 4.
And just to underscore that, Seth, thank you. You took some of that right from what I was going to say. But let's just take the nursing and home care aid ecosystem. I think almost 70% of registered nurses are white. 26% of Black women are home care aides. Lydia, I think you named a number of them. And I lift that up in conjunction with what Seth said around career advancement. It is so critical to have that ability to move up the ladder or to be able to gain more wage. It's not just about life and family sustaining, it's about wealth building. And I think in addition to creating opportunities for quality jobs, and that means access to the childcare, transportation, we also have to look at what are the wealth building opportunities that we're adding in addition to increased wages and training. I just want to add that because there is a, when we look at race, ethnicity, there is a gap that we're seeing in income and wealth building opportunities, particularly in these careers. I also want to just point out, we're talking about healthcare, but we're also seeing this in teaching and other areas. We know that jobs are changing over the next decade. 40% of jobs that exist today are quickly leaving. And so I do think there's an opportunity here to understand what might be needed in terms of job training for skills and jobs of tomorrow, and getting people that are right now not in great situations into better situations.
We've talked a lot about the low end of the labor market, which is critically important. But I think that the biggest change for folks who, like us, are sitting in our living rooms or our offices is the ability to kind of work from anywhere. And there was a lot of buzz about, oh my gosh, this has destroyed downtowns and offices and allowed, you to be in Kalispell, Montana, and it doesn't matter. And I'm just wondering if you guys think that has durably changed the geography of work is there any permanent shift in the opportunities that creates? Or is it kind of like, some white collar workers might have moved to the exurbs, but like fundamentally, it doesn't change the calculus for smaller places that had not had the chance to have those kinds of high incomes in their orbit.
I think it's a really big deal, and it's going to be durable. It's changed the job quality landscape a lot more for white collar workers than for people who do hands-on work, who still have to be there with their hands on. So it's arguably the quality of jobs in many service jobs have gotten worse since the pandemic, under more pressure, whether it's in food service, whether it's in cleaning a hotel where all the guests, arrive and leave on the beginning and the end of the weekend, and you actually have less regular schedules. Or if you're, working in the airline industry and you have to deal with passengers, God bless you. So white collar workers, arguably their jobs have gotten better. The productivity evidence is very mixed. The national data are actually quite discouraging. The social science experimental data are encouraging. So maybe we'll get there. In terms of geography, we already know that people they're demanding larger houses. They're moving further from downtowns. You can see more of people saying, well, I'll have I'll have a second house, that's in a more rural area. And, we can sort of have mixed feelings about that, but it actually does bring a lot of prosperity. If we could get more people out of Manhattan and Silicon Valley and into the rest of the country, I think there would be a lot of good things that come from that. But it's also going to change the nature of competition. So once you think, I can do my job from anywhere, your next thought is, well, anyone could do my job from anywhere. So it may be that we will not only be moving jobs around the geography of the United States, but also competing more directly. Our workers from other countries may be competing more directly for, remote jobs in the United States. So it's a big tectonic shift. it has not settled out. Clearly, we're never going fully back to the office. And what are the long-term benefits and for productivity and location and competition remains to be seen. I know I'm happy to be able to use to commute less and telecommute more, but that's the only thing I know with certainty.
We're almost at the end of our time, so I'm going to do a really quick, seriously, like 3 to 4 word answers for two questions, which I gave you in advance. One, what is one policy change you would like to see to help workers? And 2, what is one prediction you have for the labor market in the coming year? I call on Kristina.
Excellent. Yeah, we've been talking about this a bit today. I'd focus on the Jobs Act and expand Pell Grants for short-term training, increase funding for workforce development. We need it. It's absolutely necessary. The prediction is that with a full employment recession, potentially, that the skills gap is going to continue to grow. We need to train people. And unfortunately, there's not dedicated funding in the infrastructure bill, which was mentioned earlier, the CHIPS bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. People are going to need support.
A little more than 3 words, but that's okay. Seth.
Labor law reform. And my sad prediction is that unemployment by the end of, well, over the course of the next year, let's call it a calendar year, will be anywhere from 0.7% to 1% higher than it is right now. And that means anywhere from 1 million to 1.7 million workers will be out of work who are not out of work today.
This is not so obviously a policy, but I would like to see employers opening doors to what they think of as college jobs to workers without 4-year college degrees. More than 70% of minority men and women, particularly minority men, do not have a 4-year college degree. If you basically say college or bust, then a lot of people are going bust. That's very unfortunate, and that could change. In terms of prediction, I predict that the next Congress is going to be a lot less worker-friendly than the current Congress, and a lot of the well-intended efforts of the Biden administration to reduce wage theft, to improve wage overtime laws, and to allow collective bargaining to proceed on a level playing field are going to be cut back or undermined or reversed, and I'm not looking forward to that.
I have to cut it off there and hand it back to Whiteboard, but to be fair, they gave us too much to talk about and too many smart people, so apologies. Looking forward to the next panel. Thank you all. Thank everybody on the panel. See you soon.
Thanks, Lydia.
Thank you, Lydia. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, Lydia, and thanks everyone for joining. I hope attendees agree that was a pretty a lot of ground to cover that a smart group did a pretty good job covering. I'm Ben Watsky. I'm Vice President and Chief of Staff at Whiteboard Advisors. Really excited to welcome an equally distinguished group to sort of follow and build on the conversation that just happened. So please reveal yourselves as I say your names. Excited to have Audrey Mikhail, who's VP of Insights at the nonprofit Opportunity at Work, Dr. Lexi Gervis, who's VP of Impact at Steady, Ryan Craig, Managing Director at Achieve Partners, and Lisa Lewin, CEO of General Assembly. I think a really a lot to dig in on after that conversation. I think among the sort of through lines that I was sort of getting as I took notes was the way that the relationship between people and work is changing, which I think is maybe a good jumping off point for this group to start with. And I might actually, Lexi, if you're okay with it, I'd love to start with you, because I think that question about how people's relationship with work is changing is very relevant in your work. I'd love to hear your thoughts about sort of what's happened since the pandemic, particularly as people sort of shift from a traditional kind of full-time work to the gig economy, which is of course a big focus of your research. So we'll start with you and then we'll get into it.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to my fellow panelists now and the panel before. That was really interesting and excited to share this space with everyone. And Ben, you changed it up on me and gave me the question first, but I'm going to roll with it. So yeah, so, my research before I came to study found that in general, any kind of recession related events, you tend to see a spike in non-standard work. So as people lose their traditional jobs, they're picking up freelance, gig, contingent, temporary work, to be a stopgap in that moment. So the last time we saw a huge influx of this work is, not surprisingly, during the 2008 recession. And now that I've been at SETI and can kind of analyze the same data, we see the same spike happening during the pandemic, especially from the transition at the beginning of the pandemic, when a lot of people lost their full-time jobs and then picked up 1099 work to be that stopgap. So we saw over the 2 years of the pandemic that we looked at, well, not the end of the pandemic, but the 2 years that we examined within the pandemic, from March 2020 to February 2022, 80% of our population of folks that had W-2 full-time employment before the pandemic picked up 1099 work at some point. And that actually translated to a 20% increase per month. And what's really interesting is we see the stickiness of that trend now. So even though full-time, in W-2 employment is back up, we see a lot of folks still doing 1099 work. Some of it is to supplement, right? Inflation is high. So some of this is to kind of supplement any lost earnings in their W-2 work. And then some people have chose to transition to this work more full-time. So even now, I pulled actually some data for a story that Lydia had done earlier in the year. And we saw earlier in the summer, we've seen actually a 31% increase overall in income coming from 1099 work. And that's been an increase in income of 13%. So I think we're going to continue to see non-standard work, but I think we're also going to continue to see a lot of that multi-stream income, right? So W-2 income alongside 1099 income to supplement or to be a stopgap.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm curious your perspective on this and the groups. One of the other through lines from the last conversation was about job quality. And I'm curious the degree to which people are embracing that kind of non-standard work because other sorts of work are less available to them. Maybe that's true because of systemic barriers that they're facing to accessing employment, which is my attempt to segue to Audrey, because I think this is a really important point, and one that David brought up at the end of the conversation is the limitations of the college or bust approach among employers. And I'd love to hear your and Opportunity at Work's take on what needs to change there.
Yeah, it's funny that David used that phrase because it was in my head, actually. This notion of college or bust is one that we obviously want to see shift dramatically. One of the things that is part of the unfortunate reality that we live in is that employers are placing degree screens on 70% of new jobs, and that's well above the rate of people who are acquiring bachelor's degrees. The reality is that the number of people in college has been actually declining since 2010. And, employers, I think, are starting to reckon with the reality that they just can't get there from here, meaning, given the rate of hard to fill roles that they have, how long it's taking to fill those roles. And frankly, the increasingly specialized nature of some of these jobs, some of the new to world roles that we're seeing, plus the diversity and equity, inclusion, and belonging targets that they're setting, it simply defies logic to continue to insist on bachelor degree requirements, particularly when they're generic ones. So one of the things that we talk about quite a bit, and I'm so thrilled that the panel talked about skills-based hiring, is indeed starting to think about skills as the right denominator of the labor market rather than degrees and credentials. And so I think in this group, that's probably not a terribly controversial thing to say, but what worries me is that we are seeing a decline in college enrollment, but actually the thing that worries me most is not so much the overall number, it's that the steepest declines are in our two-year public institutions. So those are the organizations, those are the community colleges that serve our, typically lower income learners, that tend to serve our working learners, that tend to be, frankly, plugged into the local economies and working ecosystems, and in many cases are really clued into the demand signals of local employers better than the more traditional four-year schools, some of which are just sclerotic in their, in their recognition of what employers need. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of employers coming to a realization that the same old way of doing things finally and truly has to change. So I'll pause there for the moment, but we are very insistent and really focused on talking about STARS, workers who are skilled through alternative routes, in part because we're trying to provide a name and an identity for those who want to embrace it, for folks who went, I won't call it bust, but who did not choose or were not able to access a bachelor's degree. We think it's incredibly important for individuals who did gain their skills in other ways to be able to access an identity that employers and STARS themselves can embrace and can build on in order to create that recognition.
Yeah, thank you for laying that foundation, Audrey, and agreed. I think the last panel teed it up very well. We're very fortunate to also be joined by two fellow panelists who I think can take us from the conversation of what's going on to the conversation of what do we do about it, and what do these sort of potential attempts to address that challenge for millions of workers who are sort of locked out of economic mobility. What do those attempts look like? Ryan, Lisa, this is maybe a jump ball question, and I'm feel free to take it one after the other. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Kristina mentioned expanding short-term Pell and sort of policy solutions that are on the table right now, but both of you are working to sort of put this into practice. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how that has looked.
Sure. I mean, I've learned never to speak after Ryan Craig, so maybe I'll answer that. Maybe I'll answer that first. So here is, I'd love to talk about this from the perspective of kind of the enterprises that are staring down the barrel of this labor tightness and skills gap, and what we're seeing, how the best are responding to help solve this incredibly value destroying knot that we find ourselves in with the supply-demand imbalance. So here's what we're seeing. So first, I think that it is not an accident that over the last few years, you've seen, again, the most innovative CEOs, CHROs, and folks responsible for talent at large companies starting to talk about managing their short, medium, and long-term capital challenges in the same way that they would approach short, medium, and long-term financial planning. What do I mean by that? You're starting to hear them have to take the kinds of thoughtful actions in managing their talent supply chain the way that they would their commodities and other materials supply chains. You're starting to see them lean into, long-term talent pipeline development. That is forcing, in ways that I think are largely extremely positive, for them to diversify those portfolios in the way that you would diversify a financial portfolio, diversify their talent portfolio. What do I mean by that? Diversifying how they source talent, right? So to Audrey's point, moving from I love that word, Audrey, a sclerotic approach to recruiting only folks that have a degree, folks from traditional colleges and universities, to alternative education sources like ours, technical boot camps, or other alternative credentials. Changing and relaxing finally after a few decades of talking about this. It's happening where you have large employers starting to shift those requirements from degree-based to skill-based. Where there is a rebalancing of the portfolio from hiring from the outside when there's a job opening to being really thoughtful about how do we upskill and reskill employees that are already on our payroll for those new roles. And it really even extends all the way to having to look at that balance between onshore and offshore talent, between flexible and temp talent and permanent workers. That balance of what can be remote, because if a role is remote, it's easier to recruit for, versus what is the work that absolutely either strategically or operationally has to be done in a co-located way. So businesses cannot wait for policymakers to solve these challenges for them. So they are getting increasingly creative, and we have the pleasure of working with a lot of them. They're getting increasingly creative at using a lot of innovative solutions across recruitment, across learning and development, across career progression in order to solve for how to make sure that this talent supply gap does not, materialize in slower growth, an inability to compete, and true, value destruction. So I'll send it over to Ryan to build on that.
I think I'm probably a little more skeptical than Lisa that companies, large, mid-size, are going to make material changes in how they hire, particularly if we're heading into a recession. And HR training is always an area that gets hit when we do that. I've been spending a lot of my time over the last couple of years focused on apprenticeship. In fact, I have a new book coming out in the spring called Apprentice Nation on it. And I've become convinced that Lisa doesn't want to depend on policymakers. I think that the policy changes we need to make huge progress on apprenticeship are pretty simple. And it's really important that we do so, because a lot of the areas where we're seeing skill gaps and people shut out of good jobs are skills where it's actually harder to learn in a classroom than it is by doing at work. And so apprenticeship is really, its time has come. And unfortunately, it's still viewed by many, most, I would say, as the province of the construction trades, unions, and it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be at all, because there are intermediaries popping up everywhere that, if they're not running registered apprenticeship programs, they're running effectively apprenticeship programs, because they're not hiring based on experience and skills. They're hiring based on potential. They're hiring based on interest. They're hiring based on diversity. And they're investing significantly in training, but all the while they're paying them a living wage. And that's, I think, really the most important thing, is that if we really want to level the playing field here, there needs to be significantly more invested in earn and learn models, because otherwise you're discriminating against those who come from lower income backgrounds, who don't have money or who don't want to borrow money to pay for education and training. And just to give you a sense of sort of how imbalanced it is, American taxpayers spend 1/1000th of what they spend on accredited colleges and universities on apprenticeship. And if you compare a college-going student with an active apprentice, someone in a registered apprenticeship program, that apprentice is getting 2 cents on every dollar that taxpayers are spending to subsidize that college student. So that's it. I don't know whether the right ratio is 5-to-1 or 10-to-1 or 20-to-1, but it's not 1,000-to-1. It's not 1,000-to-1. So that's where we're focused our time. And I've actually, in my spare time, helped found this new nonprofit called Apprenticeships for America, which is an association of intermediaries. And that's really the key here, is if you look at the UK and Australia, countries who 30 years ago looked exactly like the US in terms of where apprenticeships were prevalent, which is in the construction trades and small, and where they are now, which is that there are apprenticeships across the economy, and they have 8 times the number of apprentices that America does as a per capita. So what have they done? They've incentivized the establishment of intermediaries to stand between employers and education. And that's really the key, is they can be nonprofit, they can be for-profit, they can be public agencies, but you need intermediaries to actually do the work of running apprenticeship programs. We don't expect companies to run schools to train their employees. Why should we expect them to run apprenticeship programs? And that's what these intermediaries are doing in the UK and Australia, and increasingly in the US. They're popping up, but there's no taxpayer support for it yet. And there should be, and I'm confident there will be.
I think, thanks, Ryan. I think you raise a really important question, and one that I bet there will be some differing opinions on. I mean, there already have been a little bit of sort of whose problem is it and whose job is it to fix the problem? And I think there's I get the sense from you that employers won't do it unless incentivized appropriately, and that policy might be a better solution. Lisa, I think, has experienced employers who are feeling some of those pinches and making, sort of strategic moves to change practice. So I'm curious folks' thoughts, like what are the levers that we should be pulling here to try to make these changes?
But I can jump in a little bit. There's some research that we just did, and we found some really interesting findings, including very positively and hopefully that the expansion of apprenticeship in the United States, which, while I'm not claiming that it's anywhere near where other countries are, and I hope to get there, has introduced not only some apprenticeship programs in emerging for occupations where we are considering those apprenticeship programs emerging. So as Ryan indicated, beyond the typical view of apprenticeship for trades, an interesting example of that is like pharmacy technicians, which you can imagine that was a role where there was a tremendous amount of demand. So, in expanding the number of roles that we're seeing apprenticeship as a model for training, and as a consequence of that, creating greater diversity than existed in those roles previously. So those are two just, I think, really interesting dynamics. Part of what had to be true in some of those cases, though, is, the employers simply had to come up with some kind of solution, and it was an acute enough problem. So I think it's both and. I think there are going to be situations in which employers have the right incentives to build apprenticeships, but it's got to be worth this, the juice has to be worth the squeeze for them. In other cases, I agree totally with Ryan that there needs to be broader policy support for apprenticeship.
Sure, and I'll happily build on that. So first, it's not that policymakers can't be helpful. I think that they obviously certainly can. I think the point to take away is that employers cannot wait for policy to change, and they aren't waiting for policy to change because their business requires them to be deeply innovative, regardless of the pace of the kind of political landscape and policy inertia around some of these labor issues. And that being said, I want to really, really underscore what both Audrey and Ryan have said, which is there are two areas in which I do think we can get right side up and relax some of the labor tightness immediately. One, we talked exhaustively, both in the first panel and this one, about more learn and earn opportunities. The two biggest issues why they're not at scale in the US is because there are definitely just management complexities of running apprenticeships. And hopefully there are both nonprofit and for-profit, including ours, who can really help to support enterprises who are trying to run effective apprenticeships. And then the other is the economic risk of them. It is a very big investment in potential, and that is wonderful and a worthwhile thing to do. But when you've got quarterly earnings that you've got to commit to, being able to kind of justify a large upfront expense when the return is not the same as if you are buying those skills on the market today. I think that is one of the many reasons why having states and governments in this country lean into helping to subsidize and create better architecture for employers to go down the apprenticeship route is going to be really helpful. And then I think we'd be remiss not to just address, the chronic elephant in the room, which is the cost of higher education. There are reasons enrollments are falling that don't just have to do with birth rates. It's because there is still a huge issue with the ROI of a college degree in this country. We continue to be totally upside down with a student debt crisis that is unparalleled on the globe. So if we really want to get serious about, turning, going from the pear-shaped supply chain tightness that we have today, we really do have to, that ultimately is where we're going to have to, is the biggest lever that has yet to be pulled.
Thanks, Lisa. I think one of the things that I'm curious to hear about, and Lexi, I'd love your perspective on this, is sort of what the role and the power of workers, working learners, whoever this sort of population is, should be in this conversation. I know your PhD research was on portable benefits, of which education is one, but obviously healthcare and other benefits are relevant there as well. I'm curious if you think there's more that can be done, not just to incentivize, businesses to take a more active role in sort of solving these labor market and talent challenges, but what we should be doing to sort of provide work, if anything, to provide workers with more sort of autonomy in their pathway through their careers.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And I think this is an interesting area where the conversation about portable benefits kind of gets into the area of the conversation around training and reskilling and upskilling. There's a point where, the idea that we're moving towards automation, and a lot of folks, particularly in jobs that they're doing now that might be contingent or temporary, might be losing jobs. And these are the folks that need access to money to be reskilling or upskilling. At the same time, the conversation about portable benefits is that, the benefit structure should be tied to the worker instead of the job. So as people move between different jobs in that way, the benefit structure follows them. So one of the big parts of portable benefit proposals were like a lifelong training account that starts with you as you start your career, and then throughout your career, it remains with you regardless of the work opportunity, right? So that's kind of the way that we are going to both handle the challenge right now, but oncoming challenges around automation or around work jobs, specifically in the non-standard sector more broadly. This would be an opportunity to kind of offer these opportunities to upskill or to reskill, but that are tied to the worker so they stay with you, right? So even if you are between jobs, you actually have an opportunity to access that. So that's definitely an intervention that would be at the policy level. And we all know that we're very, very far from a system of universal portable benefits that, that serves all workers. But I think it's a really interesting way in, because it's an area that a lot of policymakers can get behind. So I think if that moves us in the direction of more portable benefits that kind of stay with you and protect the work regardless of the work you're doing, then we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. I just want to jump in here and make a larger point, because I think that much of what plagues what Lisa was talking about, our system of higher education, is a market failure, because when it comes to selecting an education or training program, we have asymmetric information, right? Providers probably have a pretty good sense of sort of what the outcomes are from their programs, or if they don't, it's willful ignorance. But prospective students have no earthly idea. So I think much of what troubles our system of post-secondary education can be boiled down to this. We have less informed buyers creating market failure. The problem is that young, inexperienced, unemployed, or underemployed job seekers who most need the leg up ostensibly provided by post-secondary education usually make bad decisions. These bad decisions, they're keeping underperforming colleges and other training programs in business. So I think the best thing we can do is, from a policy standpoint, is minimize sort of desperate, uninformed buyers. And the best way to do that is to get as many as possible on career paths. Once they're on their way, they're going to make better decisions about how to get the additional skills they need. College has lots of problems, but one of those problems isn't that working adults who are already in good jobs make bad decisions about education and training programs, right? That's not a problem that we have, right? Somebody who's 35, and a director at some company making a bad decision. No, we're not worried. We're not worried about that. So let's essentially reverse what we have so far, what we've done for the last 50 or 60 years. Instead of, out of high school, instead of going right to college, we should have people work for a couple of years and work in, apprenticeship like jobs that actually lead to real careers if they want. We'd have much better informed consumers, and we'd have, lots of bad colleges that are enrolling students and graduating them into underemployment, and and significant debt would go out of business.
I actually wonder, and this is sort of a question to you, Ryan, I wonder if the sort of broader post-secondary ecosystem even agrees on what their outcomes are supposed to be. Arguably, if based on this conversation, we might coalesce around, well, job placement is at least one of the outcomes we should be aiming for. And I'm just curious if from your perspective, that's even an outcome that the traditional or typical four-year institution would recognize.
No, I don't. I think you make a great point. I don't think so. I mean, if you look at what they actually track, the ones that do track it will say, 90% of our graduates 6 months after graduating were either in a job or in a graduate program. That could be working at Starbucks. So we have no idea. But I think that, with the enrollment declines we're seeing and we'll continue to see, Lisa's absolutely right. The jig is up. Students are seeing through it and are asking questions. Another thing that, people don't talk about is the fact that, STEM degrees, technical degrees, they are holding up for the most part. It's non-technical degrees that aren't holding up. But at public universities, admission into technical degree programs is restricted, based on GPA or other factors. And some, 2-3x the demand, they're basically canceled out of majoring in a technical major because they're harder for these universities to staff and more expensive to run. So it's good. It's going to change. It's going to change.
Yeah, and I think the work that Lisa and General Assembly are doing, the work, Ryan, that you and Achieve's sort of portfolio are doing to, and of course, sort of bolstered by Opportunity at Work's research to sort of identify folks who haven't, for whatever constellation of reasons, been able to access those kinds of opportunities is hopefully going to be part of what's making the change. I have a thought of how we can sort of wrap here now that we're at the top of the hour. So we have three, I believe, parents of adolescent-ish children on this call, and then there's Lexi and me. And I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. And I believe also that all five of us are graduates of four-year colleges with four-year degrees. I think that's the case. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot and ask whether you're going to make your kid get a four-year degree or pursue other pathways. But a question that I'd love to maybe just do a quick lightning round on is, what's the world of work that you want the next generation to enter, and how is it different from this world? And I know there's people who could probably spend a paragraph on that, but maybe what's one thing that you'd want to be different for the generation that's about to kind of enter this landscape? And Ryan, we can start with you, and then I'll kind of round off.
I want work to be common from high school on. I think it should be standard that, from when you're in high school, you have at least a part-time job, and that even, bad frontline jobs have pathways built into them with training, so that if you're working at Chipotle, you could become a Chipotle manager. That's an option open to you, if you so wanted. And that the same thing goes for, gateway jobs at, large companies, or you're always presented with a pathway. You always have the opportunity to earn and learn and support yourself.
More jobs, more pathways. Lisa, I'd love your thoughts.
I'd like to declare bankruptcy on the learn, then earn, then serve sort of rule of thumb, because I think that it is a total relic on at least a couple of different levels. I think the first is the one that we've been talking about, which is, you know, technology evolves too fast. The pace of demand for skills in the labor market evolves too fast to hold on and cling to this idea that we have some sort of seminal set of educational experiences at the beginning of our lives when we're young adults, and then we will spend the next 30 plus years monetizing that fixed skill set. I think I think it's time to fully bury that idea, and that instead, you know, my daughter's graduating into a world where there's just an understanding that you will work and then learn and then work and then learn, and you will be some sort of apprentice until you retire. And then the second, just to speak to one of the things that really energizes me about this generation of folks graduating now, is that they want to serve and earn at the same time, meaning they want the work that they pursue to be a manifestation of doing good in the world. And I fully encourage that.
Thanks. So do I. Lexi, and then Audrey, you'll get the last word.
Great. Yeah, I want to double click on that as well. I had a very non-traditional path, private sector, back to the PhD, back to private sector, impact work. So appreciate that those are all happening simultaneously. I think my addition would be that, you know, regardless of the type of work you do, it's good work. So the right to join a labor union, the right to have access to employer provided benefits, to benefits that employers pay in on behalf of workers with the government, you know, the kind of full suite of benefits are available to you, even if you're a domestic worker, gig worker, farm worker, temporary worker. Kind of all work is good work, or quality jobs are quality jobs, regardless of W-2 versus 1099.
It's a whole separate conversation we could have about it. That's for the next webinar. Thanks, Lexi.
So I'll fess up as a parent of teenagers. And one of the things I've actually really taken to heart in teaching them is to try to articulate what skills they have and what skills they're developing and what skills they want. I never could have done that at their age. I'm not sure I even can do it now, but I'm trying to get them to think in those terms. And what I wish for their generation is that they can decouple questions of status from their skill and their training. And I think, frankly, that's a whole nother webinar, but it's something we've got to confront if we're going to consider college degree holders and stars co-equal.
You've left me honestly with a little bit of like energy and optimism heading into this afternoon that maybe these changes are possible. I'd like to thank the four of you again for being part of this conversation. I'd like to thank David and Kristina and Seth and Lydia off video as well for joining us. Thanks to all our attendees as well for listening in, and stay tuned. More of these sorts of conversations to come. But hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and thanks again for being here.